Hey y'all, I'm Eric and this is Joel from Music City Trucks, and today we're going to talk all about truck beds.
Today we're going to be covering some of the most common questions when it comes to refurbishing a truck bed, ranging from old school wood truck beds to conventional truck beds with a bed liner and to full-on custom.
Now, we've done a ton of different styles of truck builds, which means we've done a lot of different things to truck beds. Most recently, we refinished the inside of Clint Black's 1960 F100, we've tubbed out a mini truck, and we've done some standard work truck modifications. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for what we've done here. And today, we're going to be answering your most common questions about those three styles of beds.
But before we get into all that, be sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell so that you get notifications on all new PowerNation videos. And comment below on any topics you'd like for us to discuss in the future. Let's start with wooden truck beds. A lot of people might argue that old school wooden truck beds are borderline outdated because there's a lot of questions surrounding their durability. But with a few tips and tricks we're hoping to show you guys today, you can not only make these things look good, but last a long time. One of the first questions you might have when replacing your old wood bed is, how do I measure for it? Let's start in the corners. Now, ideally, you always want your truck bed square before you start laying in any of your wood panels. So you're going to measure from corner to corner and from side to side. Ideally, you want each of those measurements within 1/16 of an inch. When you're working on an old truck bed, if you have it sitting on some jack stands, that can present a few different obstacles. For one, you don't have the frame of the truck to support the bed, so it could flex one way or the other. On Clint Black's truck, we actually got pretty lucky, and even though we had it on jack stands, all the measurements were pretty close. So what happens if your measurements are a little bit off? Well, if the bed is too far apart, you can take a couple ratchet straps and kind of pull all those edges together. And if they're too close, you can actually take a bottle jack and pump it up with a 2x4, and that'll spread those edges back out. And if you're not using an aftermarket kit and cutting the wood yourself, what you're going to want to do is make sure each piece is exactly the same. That way you have a nice flush mount across the front and back, just looks a little nicer.
Another question that comes up a lot when talking about wooden truck beds is what type of wood should you actually use? And there's a few things to consider there. Now, if you're using an aftermarket kit like we did here, they make it pretty easy because you can look at the website and see what everything's going to look like finished before you actually purchase it. But what if you're building the kit yourself? Well, there's a few things to consider there. It depends on how you plan to use your bed, how much maintenance you want to do, and how much work you want to put into actually finishing it. Now, if you don't plan on using your truck bed for a whole lot of hauling, then softwoods are a really good option, especially for looks. Something like red cedar or pine that's easily stainable. But you have to remember, softwoods are more porous than hardwoods, so it's going to require more sealer and more finish on the back end. Also, it's going to get gouged really easily if you end up tossing something in there or something falls in it. Another option would be to use a hardwood, and it might cost you a little bit more, but there are some very distinct advantages. It's going to be a little bit more durable, especially if you plan to actually put things back here. It's not going to gouge or scratch as easily, and with those wood fibers being closer together, it's going to take you less sealer and less finish once it's actually installed. And your last option, if you have something that you plan on doing a lot of hauling with, or say a flatbed truck, would be to use construction grade lumber. Now, obviously that's going to hold up the best to any kind of beating you throw at it, but it won't look quite as good as the other options we've showed you.
And finally, arguably one of the most important topics of any bed restoration is going to be preservation. You know, you can put a lot of time and labor into one of these, and you don't want to have to do it again anytime in the near future. One of the more common ways to do it is to go ahead and sand all this down with some sandpaper, and then you can spray on your traditional automotive clear coat. One drawback to that is that you will have to do a lot of coats, maybe in the 8 to 10 range. But you can actually cut and buff it, and it looks really nice when you're done. Another option is to go to your local home improvement store and pick out an exterior deck stain or a spar varnish, and there are plenty of benefits to both of those. For one, they do a great job of blocking out UV rays, which is the #1 killer of your bed wood. And also, you can color match them and pick out any stain you want to kind of fit whatever finish you're going for. And finally, there's an old school method of using linseed oil. Now, that is one of the cheaper options, but it does have a lot of upkeep, and you just got to keep on it because it will eventually just dry out.
Our next topic involves standard metal truck beds, the kind that you see on most trucks on the road today. Now, there's a lot you can do with these things, from adding toolboxes, to roll bars, to toppers and tonneau covers to protect your cargo. But what we're actually going to be talking about is what I'm sitting on right here, and that is bedliner. One of the biggest questions we get asked about bedliner is how to properly prep your surface. And thankfully, bedliner is really forgiving as far as a coating goes. Now in most cases like this, if you're only doing light work with it and not hauling anything crazy, you can get away with just a quick scuff, clean, and spray, or roll on, whichever you decide to go with. And if you plan on hauling something a little bit more aggressive like rocks and gravel and dirt, then you can go as far as sanding with anywhere from 36 to 80 grit sandpaper to get maximum adhesion to the surface and allow yourself to build a thicker film that's going to hold up to all that stuff rolling around and scratching at your bed liner.
One of the most common questions we get is, can I spray new bed liner on old bed liner? And this is one of those situations where technically, because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should. Because at the end of the day, if you've got an old bed liner and it's starting to chip or crack or has some rust under it, spraying new bed liner on top of that is not going to stop that oxidation process. So what we highly recommend is you always start with a blank canvas. Even if it takes you a while to strip out all that old bed liner, it's going to save you more time, labor, and materials in the long run.
Another question we get regularly is if you should use a roll-on or a spray-on bed liner. And at the end of the day, they do the same thing. As long as you do your prep work and your application properly, you will get the same results from either one. So it really comes down to how much labor you want to put in to having your bed liner done. Now with a spray-on, it's really easy because once all the prep work is done and you've got it cleaned up, you can get in, spray it down, and just walk away. But with a roll-on, there's a little bit more work involved. Now with a spray-on, all your tight corners up inside of your bed rails and stuff like that get dusted by that spray. With a roll-on, you got to get in there and get it on by hand. And to get the bed floor done, you can't just stand up and spray out like you normally would. You have to get down on your hands and knees and actually roll it on. So if you want to save yourself some time and save your lower back some pain, I would highly recommend using a spray-on.
The last topic we're going to cover is custom truck beds, or more specifically, wheel tubs. And there are many variables involved with that subject matter, and it's all based on your application. On our old mini truck, we opted for a wider load wheel tub style for many different reasons. For one, we wanted plenty of wheel clearance for when we drop this thing to the ground and give it that low, mean stance. Also, we needed more clearance for our frame notches, as well as more room for future growth potential for anything and everything we might want to add to the system later. So how do I properly tub a truck? Well, there are two main factors you need to consider: strength and safety. Something like this is not necessarily a high horsepower output truck, but you know what, if you're building a drag car or something, that's where those two things are really going to come into a factor.
Another question we've seen a lot on this topic is whether you should buy your wheel tubs or build them yourself. Now, the biggest factors to consider with that are going to be your skill level and cost. Now, cost, of course, it's going to be a little bit more expensive to buy a wheel tub kit, but it saves you a lot of labor. When it comes to building your own wheel tub set, you really need to consider your capabilities as a fabricator, what equipment you have access to, and how much time you're willing to put into building this right. As far as equipment goes, you need to make sure that you've got a way to bend your metal, and you have to have a bead roller so that for your actual tubs, you can strengthen them without having to add in a bunch of cross bracing and stuff like that. One option for buying is to get an all-inclusive kit that's gonna come with your tubs and your tunnels, so that all you have to do is just set it up, mark and cut your bed, and get it all installed. Or you could buy the tubs and the tunnel separately, or you can combine building and buying like we did here. We've got a set of universal wheel tubs and a custom-made center tunnel that we did ourselves. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to you and your project and your skill set.
After your wheel tubs are built, it's time for final assembly. When it comes to that subject matter, ideally you want the most strength possible. So usually you want to go ahead and weld everything in. But I would refrain from doing any kind of solid beads or anything like that, because you could distort the metal and it's going to cause some issues down the road. So stick to stitch welding and spot welding, and also you can go ahead and put in some seam sealer, and that will also help hold your panels in place. And there's also a little bit of smaller details you can put into your final assembly on your custom truck bed that can help you in the long run, like putting some grommets in on your air lines. That'll keep those things from rubbing into the metal and cutting them later.
We've covered quite a few things today that we hope help you with your next truck bed build.
Thanks for checking us out, and be sure to subscribe for all the latest PowerNation videos. See you truckers next time.